Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me, what's one moment that changed your life forever? Share it in the comments below, thanks. It was a day like any other, or at least I thought it would be. I remember the morning clearly, my kitchen bathed in the soft morning light, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. It was quiet, almost peaceful. The house felt too empty without Gerald, but I tried to make the best of it. He was gone, but I still hadn't processed it. I wasn't ready to accept it. But then the phone rang, and everything shifted. I glanced down at the screen. Nathan's name was displayed. My heart fluttered, desperate for a connection with my only son. It had been hours since I told him about his father's passing, and I was hoping, just hoping, he would show some sign of grief, some acknowledgement that this was hard for him too. But when I answered, I was met with the coldest indifference. "Mom, it's Megan's birthday today. Can we talk tomorrow?" I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just heard. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was he really saying what I thought he was saying? My hands tightened around the phone as I tried to make sense of his words. Megan's birthday. That's what mattered today. The woman who had only recently become a part of our family? My husband, his father, was dead, and Nathan was too preoccupied with a brunch to even speak about it. "Mom, Megan's got this whole thing planned. We're having brunch, and it's really important to her. Can I call you later?" Nathan repeated, his voice distant as though he was talking about an appointment or a lunch date, not the death of his father. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, but the words hung in the air, ringing in my ears. I tried to respond, but nothing came out. I was paralyzed by disbelief. He was brushing me off. He was brushing Gerald's death off as though it were nothing more than an inconvenience. How could he do that? In that instant, it wasn't just the grief of losing my husband that I felt, it was the betrayal, the coldness of my own son's apathy. He had been so quick to dismiss the very real, very painful reality that Gerald was gone. How could he? I didn't cry immediately, though I could feel the tears welling up inside. Instead, I sat there in a deep, aching silence. I had raised him, nurtured him, given him everything, and this was how he treated me. How he treated Gerald. I looked around the kitchen, the chair where Gerald had always sat at breakfast now empty, and a wave of loneliness overtook me. I couldn't even begin to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. For hours I just sat there, doing nothing, staring at the empty space where Gerald used to sit. The house felt suddenly too big, too silent, and yet it was too loud all at once, filled with the echoes of my grief. I hadn't realized then, but that moment, that phone call, was the moment I lost more than my husband. I realized I had lost my son too. The Nathan I thought I knew, the boy I had spent years nurturing, was slipping away, and I couldn't bring him back. Later that day, in a numb haze, I called him again, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would have changed his mind. This time, when he answered, my voice cracked as I told him, "Nathan, it's Dad." He collapsed. "He's gone." There was a pause. And then, from the other end of the line, his voice, flat, detached, said, "Oh, Mom, today's Megan's birthday. I'll call you later." I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. I wanted to scream, to demand that he acknowledge what was happening. But I didn't. I just hung up, my heart sinking further into the depths of despair. The silence after that was deafening. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me. My knees went weak. And yet, in the chaos of emotion inside me, one truth stood out above all else. Nathan, my son, had already made his choice. I didn't sob, not at first. I just sat there, cold and numb, trying to make sense of what had happened. I tried to tell myself it was just a mistake, that maybe Nathan was just overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was something deeper. something irreversible. Gerald wasn't coming back, and Nathan, who I had expected to lean on in this painful time, was nowhere to be found. The day of Gerald's funeral came, and it felt like stepping into a world that didn't make sense anymore. People whispered about Nathan's absence. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the pity, but no one knew the full story. No one knew what had really happened. And I, standing there alone at the front of the room, knew that something had shifted forever. I just didn't know how much yet. The funeral was a blur. I don't remember much of it, just flashes of people, half whispers, the faint smell of flowers mixed with the sterile scent of the funeral home. I could hear voices, but they were muffled, as if I were submerged underwater. My world was silent, broken only by the occasional murmurs of sympathy from people I hadn't seen in years. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was all wrong. Gerald should have been there, sitting beside me, comforting me with his calm presence, his hand on my shoulder. We should have been standing together, united in this loss. But instead, I stood there alone. My son wasn't there. Nathan. The same boy who used to be glued to my side, the one who cried on his father's shoulder when he was just a child, was nowhere to be found. He hadn't even called. Not once. He hadn't shown up to the funeral. Not to pay his respects. Not to be there for me. Instead, I was left to stand at Gerald's casket with the weight of my sorrow pressing down on me, feeling the absence of Nathan more than ever. He was missing. Completely absent. I couldn't understand why. I wanted to scream, to lash out at everyone in that room, to demand answers. Where was my son? Why wasn't he here? But I stayed silent, the hurt too deep for words. The pain of losing Gerald was unbearable, but the betrayal, the cold indifference of my own child was a wound that cut even deeper. The ceremony dragged on, with people I hardly recognized coming up to offer their condolences. They spoke in soft tones, their words meant to comfort, but they only felt hollow. It wasn't their fault, of course, but it was all just noise. I couldn't hear them over the deafening silence left by Nathan's absence. A few familiar faces approached. Frank, Gerald's old college friend, leaned in with a concerned look on his face. "I thought your boy would be front and center today," he said softly. I forced a smile. "He's probably just busy with work," I replied, though I knew deep down I was lying. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth, that Nathan had chosen to skip his father's funeral for something as trivial as Megan's birthday brunch. And as much as I hated to admit it, I didn't want to make a scene. Not today. Not in front of all these people. But when the last of the visitors had left and the casket had been lowered into the ground, the weight of it all hit me. Alone in the parking lot, surrounded by people who had no idea what had just unfolded, I pulled out my phone and dialed Nathan's number again. This time I had to know why. The phone rang 5 times before he picked up, and I could already feel the tension rising in my chest. "Hello?" he answered, his voice so casual it made me sick. "Nathan," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "Where were you? Why didn't you come?" There was a long silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought he might not answer. But then, in the same detached way he'd spoken earlier, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I told you Megan and I had plans. She's been planning this for weeks. It just didn't feel right to cancel." I could hear the sound of laughter in the background. The clinking of glasses. It was all so wrong. I wanted to scream at him to make him feel the pain I was feeling, but the words wouldn't come. "Plans?" I echoed, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Your father's funeral was today, Nathan." "I know, Mom, but it was Megan's birthday," he replied, the words so hollow, so empty that they echoed in my mind long after he hung up. I dropped the phone into the passenger seat, feeling the numbness spreading. Megan's birthday. That's what had mattered. That's what took precedence over his father's death. And in that moment, I understood everything. The silence between us was no longer just the absence of words, it was the absence of everything that had once connected us. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at the funeral home in the distance. I kept thinking of all the things I wished I had said to Nathan, all the questions I had, the anger that churned inside me. But it was too late now. The damage was done. Nathan had made his choice, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I went back to the house that night, the empty house where Gerald would never walk through the door again. The house that no longer felt like a home. I picked up Gerald's phone from the nightstand, holding it in my hands like it was some kind of lifeline. I turned it on and unlocked it, scrolling through the missed calls. One number stood out, Nathan's. He had tried to reach Gerald the night before, but there was no voicemail, no message. Just a missed call. I stared at the screen, feeling a tight knot in my stomach. Gerald had tried to call him. He had reached out, probably sensing something was wrong, but Nathan hadn't returned the call. Not once. And that was when it hit me, the thing I had been too afraid to admit to myself. Nathan hadn't just missed his father's funeral. He had been pulling away for months, maybe even longer. And I hadn't seen it until now. The reality of the situation settled in like a cold weight, and I felt a part of me break. Days passed, but the silence never left. I moved through the motions of my life, dressing, eating, pretending to function, but inside I was hollow. The house felt too quiet without Gerald's presence. The chair he used to sit in was still there, but it wasn't the same. His mug sat on the counter, the one he used every morning, and the sight of it was like a stab in the chest. I couldn't help but think about Nathan. Why? Why had he chosen Megan's birthday over his own father's funeral? I could almost hear him dismissing my pain as easily as he had done over the phone. It wasn't like him. It wasn't the Nathan I knew. But then again, maybe that was the problem. Maybe I didn't know him anymore. He had changed over the years. I just hadn't seen it coming. The night of the funeral, I went upstairs to Gerald's office. It had always been his sanctuary, where he worked late into the night, where he kept our financial records, tax documents, and of course, the family's secrets. I never felt the need to look at anything closely. We had always trusted each other. But now everything felt different. A cold sense of suspicion lingered in the air. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but something inside told me there was more to this than Nathan's casual dismissal. I opened the drawer where Gerald kept the files, the one with all the important documents, and I found something I wasn't prepared for. There, wedged between old tax returns and retirement plans, was a thin blue folder labeled Nathan Transfers. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were wire transfer receipts. Regular transfers. Money sent from Gerald's account to Nathan's. It looked innocent enough at first, like routine financial help, but something about it didn't sit right. I kept flipping through the pages. Small amounts at first, a couple hundred here and there. But then I saw it, something that made my blood run cold. There was a transfer labeled Urgent Megan Medical. My eyes locked onto the number. It was thousands of dollars. And it wasn't the only one. There were multiple transfers, some of them labeled Rent Shortfall and Vacation Fund. And it wasn't just one payment. It was ongoing. Nathan had been receiving money from Gerald without ever telling me. A pit formed in my stomach. I tried to steady my breathing as I scanned the documents. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Gerald had been giving Nathan money for months, without my knowledge, all while I had been under the assumption that everything was fine, that Nathan was doing well on his own. But that wasn't all. I kept digging through the folder, and my hand froze when I found something more, a letter. It was written on a yellow legal pad, folded neatly and tucked between two bank statements. I picked it up, holding it carefully as if the words on the page might bite me. I unfolded it slowly, and there it was, Gerald's handwriting. I could hear his voice in my mind as I read each word as if he was speaking directly to me from beyond the grave. Nathan, this is the second time you've told your mother one thing and done another. I've kept quiet because I wanted to believe you were being honest, but if you lie about Megan's expenses again, or if I find out you've used this money for anything other than what you said, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. I love you, but I won't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. Gerald, the letter hit me like a punch to the stomach. Gerald had known. He had known that Nathan was lying, that he was misusing the money, but he had never told me. Not once. He had kept it hidden, trying to protect me from the truth, trying to shield me from the betrayal of our own son. But now, in the cold silence of the house, I could feel the weight of it all. I sat there, staring at the letter in my hands, feeling the walls close in around me. Gerald had been fighting this battle in silence, trying to protect me from the truth, from the ugly reality of our son's greed. And now I was left to pick up the pieces. I could feel the anger building inside me, but it wasn't the kind of anger I had expected. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, something more calculated. I knew deep down that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just sit back and pretend everything was fine. Nathan had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to draw the line. I had to do something that would make sure this would never happen again. Something that would protect Ava, my granddaughter, from being caught in this web of lies and manipulation. I stood up, the letter still clutched tightly in my hands. The decision had already been made. I knew what I had to do. The days following my discovery were a blur of numbness and quiet fury. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the evidence I had uncovered. Gerald's secret financial support of Nathan, the deceit, the manipulation. Everything that had seemed so normal was now cracked wide open. Gerald had tried to protect me, to shield me from the truth, but now I had to face it all. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Nathan. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront him, not until I had thought things through, not until I had a plan in place. The anger I felt for him wasn't the kind of rage that would lead to a confrontation. It was deeper than that. It was a cold realization that my son wasn't who I thought he was. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who only cared about himself. Someone who saw his parents as tools, not as people. I spent the next few nights alone in the house, going through Gerald's things. His clothes still hung in the closet, his shoes lined up neatly by the door. His favorite mug sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, as though waiting for him to return. I could hear his voice in my mind, but it was fading, like a whisper carried away by the wind. One evening, as I sat in our bedroom, I found myself staring at the drawer where Gerald had kept the spare key to the filing cabinet, the one with the important documents, the family's future. He'd always joked that it was his control center, the place where he kept track of everything. At the time, it had seemed like a small, harmless gesture, a practical way to stay organized. Now, it felt like a vault, a place where I had to go to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I grabbed the spare key, my hands shaking slightly, and made my way down the hallway. The filing cabinet stood in the corner of Gerald's office, silent and imposing. I inserted the key and unlocked the drawer. It was filled with the weight of years, tax returns, legal documents, old receipts, but I was looking for something specific. I needed to know where we stood, where I stood, in this twisted web Nathan had created. It didn't take long to find the folder I was looking for, the will. I pulled it out carefully, the crisp paper feeling like an anchor in my hands. Gerald had always said he trusted me to handle everything when the time came, but I hadn't expected it to come like this, not so soon, not in this way. I unfolded the will and began reading. It was detailed, precise. Gerald had always been thorough. But what struck me most was the section near the end, the one that dealt with the distribution of our assets. My eyes scanned the paragraph quickly. It all seemed straightforward at first. Everything was to be split between Nathan and me as we had agreed when we first made the will. But then, in the margin, there was a note in Gerald's handwriting. It was brief but pointed. If Nathan fails to honor the terms of this agreement, or if he betrays the trust we have placed in him, the entirety of the estate will pass into a trust for Ava, with the stipulation that Nathan and Megan will forfeit all rights to it. The words hit me like a slap. I read them again, unable to fully process the meaning. Gerald had already known. He had already anticipated that Nathan would cross a line, and he had made provisions to protect Ava from him. Ava, my granddaughter. Gerald's legacy. For the first time since his death, I felt a surge of clarity. Gerald had understood the dangers, the risks of being too generous with someone who would take advantage. He had been trying to protect me, to protect us all, from Nathan's growing sense of entitlement. But it wasn't just the money. Gerald knew that the betrayal would come in more ways than one. He knew that Nathan's actions would ultimately hurt the family in ways that would go beyond finances. I sat there for a long time, the will in my hands, trying to comprehend what I had just read. Gerald had planned for this. He had seen the possibility of Nathan's betrayal, and he had taken steps to ensure that Ava would be protected no matter what. I wasn't sure how to feel. Anger? Yes, there was anger, but there was also a sense of relief. Gerald had taken control in ways I never realized. He had set things in motion before it was too late. But now it was my turn. It was my turn to make sure Gerald's wishes were honored. It was my turn to protect the one person in this family who still had a chance to get it right, Ava. I locked the file cabinet and sat down at Gerald's desk, my mind racing. There was no way I could allow Nathan and Megan to take advantage of what Gerald had worked so hard for. I couldn't let them destroy everything he had built. I had to act. The following morning, I made a phone call that I had put off for too long. I called Alan Clean, our longtime attorney. He was the one who had helped us with the will all those years ago, the one who had always been there for us when we needed legal advice. When I told him what had happened, there was no hesitation in his voice. He knew how serious this was. He immediately scheduled an appointment for me to revise the will. I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to put Gerald's plan into action. It was time to make sure that Nathan and Megan would never have the chance to manipulate their way back into my life, into Ava's life, ever again. The day I walked into Alan's office, I was more certain than I had ever been in my life. There was no hesitation, no lingering doubt. Gerald had set things in motion long ago, but now it was my turn to finish what he had started. Nathan and Megan had crossed a line, one that would not be ignored. Not by me. As I sat across from Alan, the gravity of the situation hit me. The quiet, unspoken weight of all the choices I had to make. I couldn't trust Nathan anymore. Not with the family legacy. Not with Ava's future. And certainly not with what Gerald had worked so hard to build. Alan's office was always so neat, so orderly, everything in its place, like how Gerald had always kept things. But the stack of documents in front of me felt different now. This wasn't just about paperwork. This was about making sure the family's future wasn't tarnished by selfishness, by lies, by betrayal. Alan gave me a steady look as I handed him the documents, including the will, the folder with Nathan's transfers, and the audio recording I had made of my conversation with Nathan. His calm demeanor didn't waver as he reviewed the papers, but I could see his mind at work. This wasn't the first time he had dealt with a complicated will, but there was something different in the air today. A sense of finality. "Let's make sure this is watertight," Alan said, adjusting his glasses. "You're absolutely sure about this?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "Yes. Nathan has shown me who he really is, and I won't let him destroy what Gerald worked for. I'm doing this for Ava. She's the only one left who deserves it." Alan took the papers and began drafting the revisions. It wasn't a lengthy process, but it felt like the most important task I would ever do. For the first time since Gerald passed, I felt like I was reclaiming control of my life, of our legacy. The will was revised so that Ava would inherit everything once she turned 18. There would be no luxury cars, no empty gestures to placate Nathan, no more financial support for his reckless behavior. All of it was being placed into a trust that Nathan and Megan could never touch. The clause about Nathan forfeiting all rights to the estate if he challenged it remained intact. This was Gerald's final wish, and it would be honored no matter the cost. Alan double-checked everything, ensuring there were no loopholes, no way for Nathan to worm his way back in. The estate would go to Ava with the stipulation that Nathan would be cut off completely if he ever attempted to contest it. Ava's inheritance would be hers to manage under strict conditions. She would be provided for, but not spoiled. "I'll file everything tomorrow," Alan said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This will hold up in court, Cora. No one will be able to touch it." I sat there, feeling the weight of Gerald's decision settle into place. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was now the protector of what remained, the guardian of Gerald's legacy and of Ava's future. But I knew this wasn't over. Nathan and Megan weren't just going to accept this quietly. They would fight. I could feel it in my bones. "I want everything on record," I said quietly, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "I want it all documented. No surprises. If Nathan or Megan ever tries to come after Ava, I need to be ready." Alan nodded, understanding the depth of my words. "I'll make sure that everything is airtight. The trust will be unbreakable." I left Alan's office that day, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I had done what I needed to do, but I knew the storm wasn't over. Nathan would eventually find out, and Megan, she wouldn't let this go without a fight. The next few days were filled with more paperwork, more phone calls, and more preparation. The final version of the will was filed, sealed, and officially recorded. It was done. But my mind kept circling back to one thing: Ava, my precious granddaughter. She was the one who had to live with the fallout. She was the one who would inherit everything, but she would also inherit the weight of the family's secrets. She would grow up knowing the truth about Nathan and Megan. The night before I had planned to meet with Alan again to finalize the trust documents, I sat in the quiet of the house. Gerald's chair was still there, still empty. I closed my eyes and imagined what it would have been like if he had been there with me, if we had faced this together. I could almost hear his calm voice telling me everything would be okay. But now it was just me and Ava. I went upstairs and opened the drawer where I had kept the letter I had written to Ava. It was sealed, waiting for the right time. The letter was simple, but it was everything I needed to say. It wasn't just about money. It was about what Gerald had taught me, what he had tried so hard to instill in Nathan, and what I now needed to pass on to Ava. I knew I had to protect her from the bitterness, the greed, and the manipulation that had torn our family apart. I would raise her to be better, to learn from the mistakes we had all made. And when the time came when she was old enough to understand, I would give her the letter. I would make sure she knew what her family had become. But I would also make sure she knew who she was, her grandfather's legacy, my love, and the truth that no one could take away from her. I sealed the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it back in the drawer. For now, it would stay hidden. But one day, it would be her guide, her map to a future where she could choose love over convenience, loyalty over appearances, and strength over silence. Before we wrap up, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect your loved ones? What's the hardest choice you've ever had to make in the face of betrayal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be facing a similar situation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.